Our speaker is going to be Yannis Smaragdakis, a professor at the University of Athens, and he is actually the general chair of the whole conference. My first interaction with Yannis was with one of his papers when I first started my PhD, the paper from 2009. It was also at Splash, right? It was an USLA paper. And that was one of the first papers that got me interested in the whole area of program analysis and programming languages that shaped my PhD research. So I'm very excited to introduce Yannis today, and I'm sure he's going to give a really great talk about why do a PhD and how to pick an area. So,
thank you very much, Karim. I did not know that. Everyone can hear me okay? Maybe a little higher. Now? No. Fine. Okay. You can hear me in the back of the room, right? Okay, great. So welcome everyone to PLMW, and I'm going to give a pretty high-level talk. And you can see the title. It's Why Do a PhD and How to Pick an Area. And I'm going to be a little dark in the whole theme. This is a talk that I've been giving in various forms for over 15 years now. And maybe this is the time I will actually retire it rather than update it any further. Next time at PLMW, I'd love to give a technical talk. But I think this is also very interesting, and it's a good way to start the day. So I'll say a couple of words about me first, just to give you an idea of my career path, what I've done. So as a teenager, I was a bookish kind of teenager. Whatever they say about bookish teenagers, think too much and too little of themselves at the same time, something like that. I'm also someone who makes decisions I have a very hard time making decisions, so I was very fortunate about one thing in my life. I knew I wanted to do computers. That may not be your experience, because things are very different, but back then, in the 80s, there was a home computer movement. I was involved in that. Suddenly, my future was clear when before, and in every other aspect of my life, my future has been anything but clear. So I was good in math, mostly from stuff that I read on my own, and I did well in college. I was at the University of Crete, and then started grad school at Texas. I went to the US, and didn't have much of a clue. So when I started the PhD, I knew that I kind of wanted to do something scientific, but didn't have much of a clue about what I was getting into. Originally, I thought I'd do something fairly theoretical. So I started doing work in parallel algorithms, theory of parallel algorithms. And this did not seem to work out too well. I was very impatient, so it's not like I tried for very long, but like after 9 months, this didn't look like it was working too well. So very quickly, I switched to more software engineering-oriented topics with much guilt originally, which was very soon put away. I worked at Microsoft for the best part of about 2 years, so 3 summers, plus they funded my 2 years in the middle. And I did consider strongly industry versus academia, and overall, I picked academia, and that's a theme that you will see at PLMW. Why pick academia, why pick industry if you have a choice? The reason I picked academia was only because I had 2 diverse interests, and I didn't feel that I'd be happy doing just one thing in industry. So I felt like it's great for me if I switch topics every few years, and it's also great for me if I work on 3 different things at the same time. So that's, I think, also one of the major reasons for picking academia. So I've been a professor now for the past 20 years. This semester will conclude my first 20 years as a professor. I was at Georgia Tech, Oregon, Massachusetts. Now I'm here in Athens. I do work on various areas. The past 10 years, mostly in static program analysis, but also lots of language design topics. Traditionally, I did lots of work on software components, program generation, and some work in systems. So that's my introduction. So you know now pretty well who I am. And we're getting to the main course, which is why to do a PhD, and secondarily, how to pick an area, or at least my view. And feel free to comment, ask, whatever. So what is a PhD? It's an advanced graduate degree that is based on doing research. And what is research? Well, research is the production of new knowledge. So that alone should give you a first idea. Am I interested in this? Am I really interested in being one of the people who produce new knowledge, who work very hard to produce new knowledge? If you are, that's a good sign already. Okay, so why do it? Well, I've had lots of friends during my PhD years, and many of them did it for very wrong reasons. I'm not going to give names, but one of my lab mates, very close friend of mine, did it because his dad had a PhD. That's rare. Obviously, it won't apply to many people, but that was his primary reason. Like, he felt pressure to do a PhD. He didn't really enjoy it. He hasn't used it since, but that's why he did it. I had another lab mate who did it because he loved playing volleyball. And he wanted to stick around and be at Texas for years and years to win every championship in intramural volleyball he could. And he did, because he is an extremely organized person. So before the beginning of the semester, he would go and recruit the absolute top players. He won more female championships than male championships, even though he was male, because he coached, and he was great at scouting and recruiting. But his main reason was being a student was so much fun for him that he wanted to stay a student as long as possible. I don't think that's a good reason either. You're missing out on lots of things if that's your rationale for sticking around. And financially, for one thing, it may not make sense, although whether your criteria should be financial about anything, that's a different story. Now, in my view, there's only one good reason to do a PhD. And the one good reason is to be a Jedi Knight. And even if you're not familiar with the Star Wars mythos, you don't have to be. Everything you need to know, you will see in my presentation. But at the same time, everything that's worth knowing about a PhD has already been said by Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. So you will see lots of quotes from that movie. Again, you don't need to know anything. But what has Yoda said?
You must complete the training. Only a fully trained Jedi Knight with the Force as an ally will conquer Vader and his Emperor.
So, if you're fascinated by computer science and you want to go deeper, well, that's the way to do it. PhD is the right thing for you. And that's the best reason for doing a PhD. There may be other reasons. They may be valid. They may be good reasons. But that's the best reason.
This character deepest commitment. The most serious mind.
Okay, well, maybe. There's some fun there. But here's the bad news. Here are some of the things that will not be so pleasant during your PhD. At least in my experience, my PhD years, and I think that goes for a lot of people, are the time of disillusionment about many things. Hold on. What happened? Okay, that should show at the same time as the sound.
I am ready. I can be a Jedi. Man, tell him.
Vader, what knows Chris?
Okay, so this is definitely wrong because the text actually does show on this screen. Sorry about that. Doesn't matter. Okay.
Please finish what you begin.
First of all, when you enter PhD school, most likely you know very little about what's going to make you successful in your PhD studies. It is an apprenticeship. It's a process during which you will learn a lot. Now, the quote here is not exactly random. So near the end of our PhD studies, I remember having a long conversation with a bunch of my fellow PhD students, my PhD cohort, and one of them, John Gunnels, who I think is still at IBM, said back then, well, there should be only one criterion for entering a PhD. There should be only one test. It has nothing to do with intelligence or anything else. You should be able to walk up to a fireplace and grab a flaming log and see how long you can hold it. And if you can hold it for long enough, then that's good. You'll do fine in your PhD. So perseverance and finishing what you begin is by far the best predictor of PhD success, if success is defined by graduating. So, but also, getting back to the previous theme, you have a bachelor's, or you maybe you have a master's, and you're considering starting a PhD. You're not in a position to make contributions right away. Most likely, it will take you a while to get papers. It will take you a while to do things that are valued by your PhD environment. So that's the first thing that you'll find out. And you will find out lots of other things. You know, page 1 of infinite of bad news. There are people who are better than you. Well, obviously, most of you know that. Some of you may not know that. Many people come from small places. They've been near the top, if not the best, you know, in the top 5 in everything they've done. Well, there will be people who are much better than you. And you're not good at everything, so you have to play to your strengths. Because you will not be able to be both good, the best at both theory and implementation and communication and everything. You can improve in all aspects, but you will not be the best at everything. And life is extremely unfair, as you will find out. So lots of things determine success in a PhD program. It's a zoo. It's not about having a level playing field or anything like that. So there are people who are not as smart as you, not as talented in any aspect as you, not as hardworking as you, who will do better. That's a given. You should accept that. They will do better by any criterion you pick. Like, for instance, I pick here, they will end up with better results. They will have more celebrated results. There will be people who have worse results, but they will be better in everything that our society recognizes. They will have better jobs. That's fine. So life is unfair. Nobody will shield you from that unfairness when you're in a PhD. And it's not enough for you to be good at courses. So if what you've done so far is you're good, you're near the top of your class at courses, well, that's not enough. That's not enough for doing a PhD. Lots of people have done very well in courses, have not actually managed to be good researchers, ever. And it's not enough to do what you're told. You know how the standard thing goes, an undergraduate student, you give them the question, they come up with the answer, they're good. Master's student, maybe they give you a question, you come up with the answer, but that means they're good because they have a question. A PhD, you want everything. PhD student, they need to come up with a question, they need to come up with the answer to be good. So there's a lot that relies on both your initiative and your ability to formulate questions and answer them. More bad news. Different people will experience it different ways. At least for me and other people I know, PhD time was a time of great insecurity. It is a time of insecurity, and insecurity is different from stress. How do I define times in my life when I've been insecure? I get on a plane, and it's a relief, because I look out the window and everything looks small. Okay, well, I'm insecure. When it's so great that the entire planet looks small. Everything is insignificant. That's great. That's, to me, a sign of insecurity. Insecurity.
Fail you. I'm not afraid.
You will be. You will be.
So you will wonder, you'll be insecure about whether you're good enough. That's a given. Whether you can do research, especially at first. The rate at which you publish, why does everyone seem to publish and I'm not publishing? And my advice on all of these things is that if you're here for the right reason, if you're starting a PhD for the right reason, to be a Jedi Knight, then you are good enough. And you can do research. Everyone can do research because it's a climb of a hill. If you climb the hill and you learn enough, you climb high enough, anything you do after a certain point is research. Anything you see around you is new. You are near that top. But it may take a while to climb that hill. But there's no question. It doesn't take someone special to do research. Someone who's able to learn and process deeply that knowledge can do research. So, and about publishing, my advice is don't try to evaluate yourself with post-PhD criteria. Other people will not either. While you're doing your PhD, all the experienced researchers will not look at how many publications you have. It's fine. It's completely accepted. You may get lots of publications near the end, for instance. Nobody cares how many publications you have during that process, only after you graduate. So time stops. And that's kind of good news, that time stops during your PhD. Time stops as far as everyone externally is concerned. You know, maybe not your parents or friends. You'll be tired of answering the question, when are you going to graduate? I don't know. You know, whatever. That's going to be one of the toughest questions. You know, so get ready for it. You'll also be asked during the same time or in later years, you'll be asked, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? The same thing. When are you going to graduate? Same thing. So get used to evading these questions. But people who know about research, they will never ask you why it took 9 years to graduate as opposed to 5. If you can do it, if you can sustain yourself for n years instead of n minus k, nobody will care if that n is high. And you have a good excuse to hide from society, right? Yeah, you know, your answer is, I'm a PhD student. That's what I do. How's it going? Well, I'm getting good research done, but I'm still learning some sub-area, and there are things I need to explore, but it's good, it's productive. They haven't kicked me out of the program yet, so it must be good. Like, you can use that. And it's a good thing that you get all this great allowance of time, because the timeline is extremely uncertain. It really will depend on not just on your area, but on your specific chosen topic, whether it will take you 5 years to go through that, or it will take you 2 years, or it will take you 8 years. Timeline is extremely uncertain when it comes to research. Research is an uncertain thing by definition. And of course, to do this, you must keep some real-world concerns away, which is also a cause for both stress and insecurity, because you'll not have too much money. Hopefully, you'll be supported, but it's not like a full salary while you're doing a PhD. And other people around you may be getting a full salary. They may be buying houses, starting careers, whatever. You will be you'll be spending almost a decade in a time warp. When you think back, that's what you'll be thinking about that decade of your life. I was in grad school. I was doing my PhD for these entire 6 years, and time looked like it stopped for me. Nothing else went forward, or very few things. And again, that's not universal. Lots of people will have very different experiences. So now that I've brought you down a bit, time to share some good news about the whole thing. You control your fate is perhaps a piece of good news, or neutral news at least.
What's in there?
Only what you take with you. Your weapons. You will not need them.
I mean, I don't want to be too optimistic, but you have some control of your destiny. Your peer group is the entire research community. There are no preset boundaries. If you do great, you can be noticed. You're not limited by your university, you're not limited by anything. If you go deep on a topic, you do excellent work, people will see that work because you're publishing at the same venues as everyone else. So your goal is to get to the point of publishing at the top venues as anyone in any university worldwide. So to some extent, it is a level playing field. In other ways, it's not, but in many ways, you have a great peer group worldwide. You can actually meet them. You can get your work recognized by everyone worldwide. So it is worth going in and trying to do good and deep work. So my advice is strive to improve yourself. If you don't have time pressures, it will eventually pay off, is my experience and impression. And you are in the ideal position to make significant contributions. It pains me to say it. I hope that I have significant contributions still in me, but professors are not in such a position nearly as much as PhD students. So a professor is much more distracted in terms of time commitment than you are. People who start a PhD, they have the time, they have the energy, and the courage, many times, to go deep and make very significant contributions. That people with more experience, of course, they have experience, but they do not have the same luxury to go deep. And that's why professors work in collaboration with PhD students, because we cannot spend all that time and go deep in many interesting research problems. Of course, like all the kind of optimistic things, this is a survivor story. You have to doubt me like every other advice giver, because survivor bias is a very nasty thing, and everyone who's made a lot of money out of Russian roulette will tell you it's a great way to make money because everyone who thinks otherwise is dead already. So take it with a grain of salt. So what's the real good news now? The unqualified good news. It's a fun life. It's a fun and very interesting life. If you do it because you want to go deep in CS, a PhD can be tremendous fun. It's the only time in your life you will be paid to learn, or maybe the last time. Definitely the time in your life you will be paid the most to learn the most. So that's a luxury you will not get later in your professional career. You will work on interesting things, and you can choose to think of yourself any way you want. You can think of yourself as a freelancer. You can think of yourself as a researcher on commission, whatever. But you will have a lot of freedom, typically, fairly few obligations, and you are a student. Like I said, there are people who do it just because being a student is fun. But you have one big plus, you can support yourself. So you're a fairly independent student. So it can be a life that's great fun. So with this, I'd like to switch to the next subtopic, which is to try to give an idea of how to pick an area once you've entered the PhD program. Also, before you enter a PhD program, because that's probably a decision that you want to make even before. So what criteria might one use there to pick an area? And again, I think Yoda had some excellent advice.
Yeah.
So there are many different kinds of research in computer science. Let's roughly, first of all, do a very rough classification of scientific research and engineering research. What's scientific research? What's engineering? Let's roughly say scientific is anything that's based on analysis. You look at something that's very, very small, but you look at it in great detail in a controlled environment, and the big question there is whether it maps back to anything real. Versus research that's based on synthesis. You are focusing on something that has immediate real-world importance, and you care more about having a final artifact that has real-world repercussions, and you don't care so much about the little ideas that went in it. And you will see this style of research also in different venues, different conferences, different journals, different sub-areas. They do have different styles of research, but often, even in the same area, you will have many, many different kinds of research. So for instance, I'm mentioning somewhere later that there are areas that are entirely compositional, like networking or software engineering. You can find people who do lots of theory in networking and people who do completely hacky stuff. Now, in programming languages at least, and people will tell you about programming languages quite a bit during PLMW, we are kind of trying to be experts on nearly everything. So a strong PhD graduate in programming languages is typically very good at implementation and pretty good at theory, or vice versa. Very good at theory, pretty good at implementation. But we are at an area that's at the edge of both applied stuff and theoretical work. So not entirely universal again, but it's a good rule of thumb that you have to like a little bit of both. You have to like a little bit of implementation. You cannot just get away with just theory. And you cannot get away with just implementation, with just hacking. You have to be able to do your math a little. Now, picking an area is, of course, greatly important, just like picking the dark side. And at least for the first part of your career, if not the entire career.
Forever, when don't make your destiny consume your career, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice. Vader.
Yeah, it's not that ominous, but seriously, you are committing to something that will follow you for quite a while. Although there are exceptions, there are people who have switched areas very successfully very soon after their PhD, most likely, at least for the first 5 years after your PhD, but most likely for your entire career, you are affiliated with that same area. Now, how do you pick an area? Let me tell you one thing. You cannot predict the future. I mean, right now, there are great hot areas, right? There's machine learning and data foo, or food data, big data, data science, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's basically what used to be called AI and databases, and they were both very hot in the 80s. In the 80s, almost 40 years ago, it took them a while to become really hot again. Let's take AI, which is clear-cut, even if you don't think that food data is the same as databases. AI and machine learning, you know, you can ask anyone in machine learning, what's machine learning? Well, it's the modern way we say AI. Different techniques slightly, but really same thing. Between the 80s and today, AI was nearly dead. You know, that needs to be qualified a bit, but it's at least a 30-year period when it was very hard to get a job if your PhD was in AI. So just consider that. In the 90s, what was hot? Oh, you did multimedia? That was really hot. You could get a job. You had one good systems paper, but you sold yourself as a multimedia researcher. Wow. Top university job. Networking, of course, was hot during the 90s. During the 2000s, well, security. Security is still kind of interesting, kind of hot. Biocomputing. Those were very hot. You don't hear about them so much today. There are really good jobs still, but you see that they are not at the top of the hype curve. So you cannot really project the future. You cannot predict the future. And you will very often find that when it takes you 5 or 6 years to do a PhD, something that you thought was hot at the time you entered the PhD is no longer hot when you graduate. If there are many jobs in X today, in X plus 5, there may be many, many fewer jobs. So don't pick an area because of what you think are the prospects for future employability. This may well change. Now, another thing that you could use is importance in the real world. So in that case, your area of research should be addressing hunger in Africa or something. There are lots of things that by most metrics, they have greater importance in the real world, but either we have no hope of solving them, or they're not scientific questions. There are no scientific questions there. So that's another advice. Do not try to pick an area based on the importance of the problem in the real world. Real-world problems are very hard to solve. They're multifaceted. So, and if you want to work on something important and eventually make no difference because the underlying questions are not scientific, then just go and be a politician. Don't start a PhD. That's basically, that's absolutely true. So as scientists, we focus on technical problems, and we do. What can you concentrate on? Well, you can look into mode of research. And by mode of research, I mean, what does a researcher do every day? What does a researcher do every 3 months? What does a researcher do every year? What kind of results do they get? And do these results inspire you? And also, can you live with the everyday actions of someone who does research in that area or sub-area? So the flavor can be classified roughly as theoretical or applied, but also look at the results. Do they inspire you? Because part of doing good research, part of doing research during your PhD, is deluding yourself that the minute results that we get and we publish, they're really important and world-changing. So you have to really be inspired to look at something that's this small and think that, hey, this is really important, this is worth it. This is worth someone's time to spend a year of their intellectual effort to just come up with this, even when everyone else thinks it's a complete detail. So a different way to put it is don't trust big results.
War's not the one great.
And Yoda said it about great warriors. Wars not make one great. I like the big results in every area you give me. Pick any area in computer science, give me the 5 top results. I love them. I'd love to have come up with them. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. I would not have the motivation to put in the energy to come up with these results in most areas. I wouldn't be inspired by the incremental results to eventually be lucky enough or able to produce one of the big results. But even if you go to the, let's take theory. If you give me a big advance in theory in algorithms, let's say, you give me something that's a tremendous advance. Suddenly you can do multiplication and it's asymptotically much, much faster to the theoretical limit and it's a celebrated result. Hey, I'd love to come up with that. But the incremental results that came up before that shaved off a tiny bit of an exponent in that asymptotic complexity, I could care less about them. So I would never have produced the big results either. And that's just an example. So you have to care about the little things. You have to be interested in the little things to eventually get to the big things. And like I said, even if you don't consider them important, at the very least, you should consider them fun. I can see myself thinking about this problem that, my grandpa would not understand, but that's okay, because I care about it. I know enough to appreciate it. So, to conclude, as a grad student in Texas, I took a course in technical entrepreneurship. And it was taught by a professor who had started a CAD company, had made a bunch of money, and he was actually trying to tell us some business practices. And it was actually a great course, but it was mostly to people who had nothing to do with business at that point anyway. So it gave us a very different perspective. So one of his quotes is that to be a successful businessman, you have to not fall in love with your cows. And there was a whole story, and you can look it up on Google nowadays. It's about some cow farmer who starts a business, has his big farm, gets cows. The farm becomes very successful, and time comes, he could sell it, but he doesn't want to sell because he really loves the lifestyle. And the person's sin is that he fell in love with his cows. Very, very Texas, very, very nice. So that's, if you're starting a business, don't fall in love with your cows. You should not love your technology. You should not love the actual artifacts. You should be completely detached. You should be able to just make the right business decisions that make financial sense. If you're starting a PhD, you have to fall in love with your cows. And the cows it may take some effort, but you can fall in love with them. The cows can be fascinating, but you really have to love what you do. So that's all I had to say, and I think I'm right on time.
Just want to remind everyone also with the Slido link, if you want to ask, post your questions there, and we'll be able to see it. So if you have any questions, we have a few minutes for questions.
A lot of times in grad school applications, you'll see like, oh, you have publications, then put them on here because that's really great. People say like when applying to grad school, that's a good thing to have. So I guess I'm having trouble understanding the cognitive dissonance between it's good to have publications even before applying to grad school, and you don't even need to have them until like you're close to the end of your PhD.
We are insane. You're absolutely right. So the question was, it's considered a great thing to have publications when you're applying to a PhD program. That's proof that you're doing research, that you can do research. At the same time, I just told you that people will not look at your publication record until you're close to the end of your PhD. That's when they will start caring. They will not care about what you did in the middle. So how do you reconcile that? There is a cognitive dissonance there. So first of all, PhD admissions worldwide are completely broken. We are complete idiots. We are making decisions based on very, very little information. So that's why we are grasping for everything that might give a little bit of information. And sadly, that's the way it works. And yes, people who have publications who have a publication when they apply to grad school have a much better chance, which is insane because everyone knows how they got these publications most of the time. They were just at the right place at the right time. During especially a 4-year bachelor's, even a 5-year bachelor's, nearly no one has time to do independent publication by themselves or to take initiative. They just contributed a little thing in a group effort. They were at the right place at the right time. They got their name on a paper, and suddenly they look like the second coming of the Messiah or something. So yes, it is insane. Yes, it is a fact of life. No, nobody knows how to do it any better. I wish there was a better way, but that's the honest answer. Both are actually true. In fact, both when you apply for your PhD, you apply to PhD programs, and when you graduate with a PhD, you're not evaluated on achievement. You're evaluated on promise, both times. The very first time in your life you will be evaluated on achievement is after 5 years of being in a permanent researcher position, or post-PhD, let's say. Up until that point, if you project the right image of great promise, you will be accepted nearly everywhere. So it's an insane thing when you draw only a few pixels of the curve and people need to project from that. And that's the result. The result of that insanity is exactly what you notice. Yeah?
Okay, so coming from like a non-research university, and you can kind of seek out opportunities to pursue your own research, how would one get started in that kind of thing? Because like, I feel like a lot of people want to pursue their own research, but they find it either difficult to like do it at their university, or they don't have the resources.
Own research meaning completely on your own, no advisor, no nothing.
I mean, suppose you might have an advisor, but they're not like fully committed to like advising you.
So you're really asking, you're an undergrad at a non-research university. How can you get some kind of a research record? It's not easy. I mean, I think it's a better bet to apply to a master's program at a research university, or to apply right away for a PhD based on your ranking among classmates, based on some recommendation letters that are not research-based. You won't have publications. You will not have anything else, but someone will say, this is one of our smartest students. You have a much better chance. Now, obviously, everything varies based on your local environment. There could be people at a non-research institution who do research, because professors are still motivated to publish, even if it's not the #1 item of their job. They still have requirements or internal motivation to publish in nearly every institution. So clearly, you may be able to find some people. If you cannot find people in your area of interest who will actually supervise you, offer you something, just finish your bachelor's and go somewhere else. And worst case, you go somewhere else for 2 years and then you apply again. That would be my advice anyway. Yeah. You will talk about that. Excellent.
Yes.
I would also add, as a response to that, there are often opportunities for finding mentoring in a more remote sense when you're doing research. So one example that popped into my head is that GHC, the Haskell compiler, has a summer of code every summer where they sponsor a number of students to be mentored by people in the community, and it is more implementation-y than some other work, but it definitely can involve original research topics. And there are similar kinds of things where you can seek out these sort of quasi-academic or entirely academic research collaborations that don't exist in your own institution but have funding from
Big like to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
It exists.
Yes, remote mentoring opportunities are great. All these sorts of programs.
I think this would be a good topic actually to discuss further during the coffee break. So let's thank Yannis again.